The silence of deep space was broken by a faint crackle of static. At first it was nothing unusual, just the background noise every long-range operator learned to ignore. But then came a voice low, trembling and soaked in grief. "If anyone hears this, they killed my family." The voice belonged to Captain Laura Kane, and though the words were simple, they carried the weight of something far greater. On a small listening post orbiting Jupiter, the operator froze in his seat. This wasn't a normal distress call. This wasn't a plea for rescue. It was a warning. Across the galaxy, the Zereth Empire's shadow had been growing for decades, consuming weaker worlds one after another. But Earth had been spared their attention until now. Laura's colony was a small one, far from the core worlds, and it had no military value. But that didn't stop the Empire's warships from burning it to ash. Her husband, her 2 young sons, her parents gone in an instant. She had been off-world during the attack, a supply run that saved her life. Now, as her small freighter drifted through the darkness, she spoke into the calm, her voice sharp with rage. "This message is for Earth's command. The Empire thinks we will kneel. They think they can break us by killing the ones we love. They have no idea what they've started." Her ship's hull was scarred and scorched from the chase. For 3 days, Imperial hunters had pursued her, but she knew the backroads of space better than anyone. She'd lost them in the gravitational storms of a binary star system, but she knew they'd come again. She wasn't running for safety, she was running for war. Locked in her ship's cargo hold was the single most dangerous thing the Empire never wanted humans to have: a complete set of coordinates for their hidden war factories, shipyards, and fleet staging areas. She hadn't stolen them by skill or luck. She had ripped them from the nav systems of a dying Imperial commander who had begged her for mercy. She gave none. Back on Earth, the message didn't just travel through military channels. It leaked. Someone sent it to old veterans' networks, 2 long silent war forums, to the private comms of shipyard crews. Men and women who had fought in the last human war decades ago heard Laura's voice, and something in them stirred. The death fleets had been mothballed since the Treaty of Sol, locked away in hidden orbital docks. Their massive warships were meant never to fly again. But orders began to move through the chain of command, slow at first, then faster. Engines that hadn't burned in a generation roared to life. Crews were recalled. Fighter pilots were woken from peaceful civilian lives. The Empire's spies noticed. In the border sectors, they saw sudden troop movements. Massive carriers leaving orbit, supply convoys heading to classified coordinates. They laughed at first, reporting to their superiors that humans were bluffing, that Earth's ships were outdated and its soldiers unprepared. But their laughter faded when patrol fleets began to vanish without a trace. The last transmissions from those fleets were filled with bursts of static and faint human voices giving attack orders. Somewhere in the darkness, something old and dangerous was moving again. Laura's freighter finally reached the Sol Gate, a massive ring station that guarded the approach to Earth. Her ship was scanned and cleared without delay. Someone high in command had already given her unrestricted passage. As she passed through the gate, she looked out at the distant glow of Earth, her homeworld, and for the first time since the attack, she felt the faintest ember of hope. She opened her comm one last time and sent her words on every secure frequency. "This is not just my fight. This is humanity's fight. I want the Emperor to hear my name before I end him." In the war rooms deep under Earth's surface, generals and admirals studied the coordinates she had brought. Each location marked a blow that could cripple the Empire. The room was silent until the oldest admiral there leaned forward and said, "Wake the fleets." Across the system, the order repeated again and again, "Wake the fleets." On the edges of human space, hidden shipyards opened like blooming steel flowers, releasing monsters of war the galaxy had hoped never to see again. Laura's message had done more than warn. It had lit a fire that would not burn out until the Empire itself was ashdot, far away. In the Imperial capital, the Emperor sat in his golden throne, listening to the intercepted recording of her voice. He smiled a cold, cruel smile and whispered to his advisors, "Let them come." He believed he understood war. He did not know he had just invited Earth's ultimate arsenal into the light. The order to wake the fleet spread through human space like lightning across a stormy sky. In hidden docks orbiting barren moons, crews that had been idle for decades suddenly sprang into action. Massive blast doors opened, revealing the dark hulks of ships, so vast that they blotted out the stars. These were the death fleets, vessels built not for defense, but for the complete destruction of an enemy. Their hulls were layered with armor no weapon in known space could pierce in a single strike. Their weapons had names whispered like curses in alien war stories, the Hellfire Lances, the Vortex Cannons, and the Hunter Drone Swarms. They had been sleeping, sealed under treaty orders after the last Great War. But now they stirred awake, their reactors humming with deadly purpose. Across human colonies, the call went out for every veteran, every pilot, every engineer. Some were pulled from peaceful farming worlds, others from corporate offices. Still others from quiet mining stations where war had been only a memory. They came without hesitation. Old rivalries between human nations vanished overnight. There was no Earth or Mars or Europa now. There was only humanity. Humanity was sharpening its blade. The Zareth Empire's intelligence network noticed the movement. From their outposts along the border, they sent warnings back to the Imperial Command. Humans are mobilizing fleets, the report said. They are gathering weapons of war. But the Empire's High Council scoffed. Humans are undisciplined, they told themselves. They will fight with scattered forces. They have no will to face the full strength of the Empire. To them, humans were traders, explorers, and stubborn settlers, not conquerors. What they didn't understand was that humans had not forgotten the last time they were threatened. The death fleets had been built for exactly this moment. In the cold reaches of space, small Imperial scout ships began to vanish. At first it was blamed on navigation errors, sensor malfunctions, or pirate attacks. But soon the losses grew impossible to explain. A convoy of 6 Imperial destroyers failed to report in. A heavily armed supply station stopped transmitting altogether. On a remote listening post, an Imperial operator swore he heard a human. The voice whisper through his come before the signal cut. We're coming. Laura Kane was now deep within Earth's military command network. The coordinates she had stolen were being plotted into attack routes. Some of the younger officers treated her with awe, as if she were already a war hero. Others looked at her and saw the reason the war would happen at all. She didn't care what they thought. She cared only about destroying the Empire. She spent hours in strategy rooms, pointing at weak points in the Imperial defense grid, describing the patterns of their patrols, the timing of their resupply runs. She had lived under their shadow for years. She knew how they thought. Out on the border, the first human strike teams moved in silence. They didn't arrive with blaring war horns or grand announcements. They came like ghosts, their ships masked. By stealth systems so advanced, they were invisible even at close range. They slipped into Imperial-controlled space and began dismantling their infrastructure piece by piece. A communications hub went dark. A refueling depot exploded in the night. A deep space weapons platform was found drifting, its crew missing, and its systems erased. Every action left the same message burned into whatever surface the humans could find. This is for the Kane colony. Back in the Imperial capital, the Emperor's mood shifted from arrogance to irritation. They wish to provoke us, he told his admirals, then we will crush them quickly and publicly. He ordered the Imperial Grand Fleet, the largest single force in their arsenal, to assemble near a key border system. It was a trap designed to lure the human fleets into one massive battle where they could be annihilated. The Imperial propaganda machine promised swift victory. But far from the capital, in the cold war rooms of Earth, the human admirals saw the trap for what it was. And instead of avoiding it, they smiled. Laura stood at the center of the planning table, eyes fixed on the glowing holographic map. Think they're hunting us, she said quietly. But they've already stepped into our sights. The death fleets were ready. The hunters were about to become the prey. The Imperial Grand Fleet waited like a wall of steel at the edge of the border system. Hundreds of warships formed into perfect battle lines, their engines burning bright against the blackness. Flagships bristling with heavy cannons stood at the center, surrounded by waves of cruisers and destroyers. It was a display meant to intimidate, to show the galaxy that the Zereth Empire still ruled through fear. Admirals aboard those ships smirked, confident that the humans would stumble right into their net. They believed Earth would answer with a head-on charge, a desperate show of bravery, before being crushed. They were wrong. 3 hours before the Imperial fleet expected contact, the first shockwave hit them. Without a single warning, an entire outer defense station vanished from their tactical screens. It didn't explode in fire or leave debris drifting in space. It was simply gone. Panic rippled through the Imperial command channels. They scrambled to recalibrate sensors, believing it was some kind of glitch. Then the second station disappeared, and the third, which loss was silent and unseen. They were under attack, but there was no enemy in sight. What they didn't know was that humanity had deployed a weapon the galaxy thought was impossible. The Ghost Lance. A mobile stealth platform armed with mass. Drivers capable of punching holes straight through heavy armor from extreme range. No sensors could detect it. No tracking systems could lock on. It didn't just destroy targets, it erased them. The Ghost Lance was older than most of the officers commanding the death fleets. A relic from a war so secret it wasn't even in the history archives. Now it was awake again, hunting. Laura Kane watched the destruction unfold from the bridge of her own ship. She had been given a front row seat to humanity's first counterstrike. Her fists clenched as she saw Imperial formations scatter, trying to locate a threat they couldn't even see. The death fleets didn't waste the opportunity. From the darkness, human warships emerged, not in one great wave, but in scattered attack groups, hitting the Empire from every direction at once. Fighters screamed through the gaps, dropping cluster munitions into the heart of enemy squadrons. Rail cannons fired at extreme range, their projectiles tearing through ships before the sound of impact even reached the victims. Dexton Imperial battleship turned to pursue a group of human corvettes, only to be gutted from below by a pair of hunter drones that slipped past its shields. Another Imperial cruiser detonated as its reactor was pierced by a pinpoint rail slug. The neat, orderly lines of the Grand Fleet dissolved into chaos. On the Imperial flagship, Admiral Varro barked orders in fury. He had underestimated these primitive humans. Find their command ship. Cut off the head, and the body will fall. But there was no single command ship to target. Humanity's fleets didn't rely on one leader at the center. Every vessel carried full battle authority, able to act independently or as part of the whole. It was a swarm, and the swarm was tearing the Empire apart. Laura's cum crackled to life. It was Admiral Rhodes commanding the First Death Fleet. Captain Kane, we have a gap in their line. We're pushing toward their supply carriers. Ships go down, their entire formation collapses. She answered without hesitation. Send me the coordinates. I'll guide you in. Together they spearheaded the assault. Laura's ship wove between enemy fire, her crew firing precision shots that crippled escorts and cleared a path. Behind her, the massive human dreadnought Iron Requiem unleashed a full broadside into the Imperial carriers. The explosion lit up space like a newborn star, and the Empire's formation broke for good. By the time the battle ended, the Imperial Grand Fleet was in ruins. Dozens of their ships drifted as burning hulks. Others had fled in panic, leaving the border system wide open. Humanity had not only survived the Empire's trap, they had turned it into their first major victory. Laura stood on her bridge, staring at the wreckage. The crew around her celebrated, but she felt no joy.
Wow.
This was just the beginning. The Emperor will hear of this, she murmured, and when he does, I want him to know my name. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the smoke and silence, the path to the heart of the Empire had opened, and humanity intended to walk it. The Emperor's rage boiled over when news of the Grand Fleet's defeat reached the capital. His voice echoed through the marble halls of the Imperial Palace, promising vengeance so severe that no human world would survive. He summoned his war council, demanding a counterstroke that would end the war before it could spread. The plan they devised was bold and cruel. They would lure the death fleets into a system known as Kor's Fall, a dying star surrounded by a dense field of asteroid debris. Once the humans entered, the Imperial fleet would trap them in the kill zone and unleash every weapon at once. To the Empire, the plan seemed flawless. Kor's Fall was littered with wreckage from centuries of battles, perfect for hiding ships. The dying star's unstable energy pulses would scramble sensors, making retreat nearly impossible. Imperial ships began to slip into position, one after another, until an entire armada lay hidden among the asteroids. Massive siege cannons were anchored to the largest rocks, their barrels pointed toward the entry point where the death fleets would appear. It was a trap inside a trap, and the Empire was certain this time the prey wouldn't escape. But humanity was already watching. Hidden reconnaissance drones, no larger than a child's toy, had been drifting through Kor's Fall for weeks, mapping every asteroid, every hidden weapon, every patrol route. In a secure command room aboard the dreadnought Vigilant Dawn, Laura Kane stood with Admiral Rhodes and his senior officers, studying the holographic projection of the enemy's trap. The plan was dangerous, but the Admiral's smile was cold. "They think they're hunting us," Rhodes said, "but we'll be the ones closing the jaws." The trap was sprung exactly as the Empire had planned. Human ships entered the system in a tight formation, deliberately allowing Imperial scouts to spot them. The Empire reacted instantly, moving their hidden fleet into attack positions. Siege cannons rotated toward their targets, targeting computers, locking on. Then, just as the order to fire came, the star at the heart of Kor's Fall flared with impossible brightness. It wasn't natural. Humanity had triggered it. Weeks earlier, stealth teams had planted a controlled fusion charge deep within the star's unstable layers. Now, the blast caused the star to surge in a blinding eruption. Radiation and electromagnetic waves tore through the system, frying Imperial optics and overloading their shield harmonics. For critical seconds, the Empire's fleet was blind, and that was all the death fleets needed. Human warships appeared from every direction, emerging from behind asteroids and debris fields where they had been waiting. They struck with surgical precision. Missile salvos slammed into Imperial command ships before they could respond. Fighter squadrons darted between blinded cruisers, dropping smart munitions into engine vents and weapons bays. The massive Vigilant Dawn and Iron Requiem advanced side by side, their rail cannons tearing through battleships as if they were made of paper. In the chaos, Laura Kane led a boarding team onto a crippled Imperial destroyer. Her target was the ship's command bridge. She wanted the name of the officer who had ordered the slaughter of the Kane colony. The corridors were dark and littered with smoke. Dead crew floated in zero gravity, their eyes wide in frozen terror. When she reached the bridge, only one survivor remained, a young Imperial lieutenant, trembling and bleeding from a head wound. She grabbed him by the collar and demanded, "Who gave the order?" His answer was a whisper, barely audible over the ship's dying systems. The Emperor himself. A message. By the time Laura returned to her ship, the battle was over. The Imperial fleet lay in ruins, their grand ambush, nothing but drifting wreckage. Humanity had not only survived the trap, they had used it to cripple another segment of the Empire's war machine. As the Vigilant Dawn moved away from Kor's Fall, Laura stood alone on the observation deck, her jaw set. The war was no longer about survival, it was about vengeance. And now she knew exactly who her final target would be. The news from Kor's Fall spread through the galaxy faster than any fleet could travel. Entire worlds whispered of the impossible. The Empire had prepared a perfect trap, and yet it was the Empire that had been destroyed. Allies of the Zereth began to waver, wondering if siding with humanity's enemies was a death sentence. Even neutral systems, long afraid of drawing Imperial wrath, quietly sent supplies and information to Earth. Humanity's power was no longer a rumor. It was a storm rolling across the stars. On Earth, the war councils no longer spoke of cautious strikes or limited engagements. The time for restraint had ended the moment Laura Kane learned the Emperor himself had ordered the death of her family. Now, the death fleets would unleash their full-might weapons so terrible they had never been used in recorded history. The first was the Planet Cracker missile. Each one was the size of a small freighter, armed with warheads capable of shattering a world's crust. They were not fired at civilian planets, but at the Empire's shipyards, fortresses, and military colonies. When the first detonated above the fortress moon of Garvos, the explosion lit the system for hours, vaporizing every vessel in orbit and leaving the surface split into molten rivers. Then came the Hunter, drone swarms, clouds of AI-controlled killers that moved faster than any fighter and could chew through a capital ship in minutes. They didn't retreat, they didn't miss, and they didn't stop until nothing in their targeting memory remained alive. Scanned, Imperial convoys vanished in deep space, their wreckage found days later, shredded to pieces. But the most feared weapon of all was the orbital rail cannon network. Hidden on asteroids and deep space platforms, these cannons could fire projectiles at near relativistic speeds, striking a target from light minutes away. Imperial commanders would watch their tactical maps and see a bright flash on one of their ships, and then, seconds later, hear the sound of impact tearing through the hull. There was no defense. The Empire's front lines began to collapse. Systems that had flown the Imperial banner for centuries surrendered without a fight. Some worlds turned on their Imperial garrisons, offering the occupying soldiers positions to the advancing human fleets. In the Imperial capital, fear spread through the nobility. Though none dared speak it aloud, Laura Kane moved with the fleets, always at the front, always hunting for the next blow to strike. But her mind was fixed on one goal, the Emperor's throne. She knew he was hiding behind the most fortified world in the Empire, a planet wrapped in shield arrays so powerful that even a planet cracker missile could not penetrate. That fortress world had never fallen in the Empire's long history. No enemy had even reached its orbit. One night aboard the dreadnought Vigilant Dawn, Admiral Rhodes summoned Laura to a private meeting. The room was dim, lit only by the holographic projection of a single weapon, the Ragnarok Lance. It was humanity's ultimate strike system. A weapon so devastating that its very existence had been erased from official records. Powered by an antimatter core and focused through a graviton lens, it could punch through planetary shields and burn straight into a world's core. It had been built in secret during the last galactic war, then hidden away because its use would have been considered a crime against life itself. "This is your weapon," Rhodes said, his voice grim. "We're bringing it out for one reason, to end the Emperor." Laura stared at the weapon's schematics. It was beautiful in its terrible simplicity, a single beam of concentrated destruction. She thought of her family, of the Kane colony, burning under the Empire's bombardment, and she nodded once. "Prepare it. When we fire, I want every Imperial to know who pulled the trigger." The decision was made. The fleets would gather for one final push, cutting through the Empire's last defenses until they reached the capital. The Ragnarok Lance would be positioned for a single killing shot. Far away on his throne of gold and blood, the Emperor sat in silence. His advisors spoke of desperate counterattacks, of new alliances, of fortifying the capital. But the Emperor's gaze was fixed on the stars beyond his palace window. Somewhere out there, he knew, the human woman whose voice had once dared defy him was coming. And this time, she was bringing the end of his empire with her. The human fleets emerged from hyperspace like a tide of steel, filling the Imperial capital system with the glint of warship hulls. Every vector was covered. Carriers, dreadnoughts, cruisers, and swarms of fighters moved in perfect coordination. As the Empire's last defenses scrambled into position, but it was already too late. Supply lines had been cut, reinforcement fleets destroyed. Trap was closing, and humanity was holding the jaws. From the bridge of the Vigilant Dawn, Laura Kane stood before the great viewing window. The planet of Zereth Prime looming in the distance. Its oceans shimmered under the light of its twin moons, and its great cities glowed with energy. Somewhere down there, deep beneath layers of planetary shields, the Emperor waited. She could almost see him in her mind, smug, untouchable, certain that no weapon in existence could reach him. The Ragnarok Lance hung in space like a silent god, its long barrel pointed directly at the planet. It was escorted by an entire battle group, every ship ready to die before letting a single enemy touch the weapon. Technicians in sealed suits moved along its surface, making final calibrations. The antimatter core glowed faintly, contained inside. Graviton fields so powerful that the air around it seemed to ripple. One mistake, and it would vaporize half the system. But Laura wasn't thinking about mistakes. She was thinking about pulling the trigger. The Imperial fleet made their last stand at the outer defense line. Thousands of ships formed a shield. Around Zereth Prime, their formations tight, their weapons firing in perfect unison, the humans hit them from every side. Rail cannon slugs tore through cruisers. Hunter drones swarmed battleships, and fighter wings sliced into the gaps like blades. The space around the planet became a burning graveyard of drifting wreckage. Laura's voice cut through the coms, calm and sharp. No one reaches the lance. Hold the line. Her own ship dove into the thickest fighting, her crew working with brutal precision. An Imperial destroyer tried to break through toward the Ragnarok, but Laura's gunners tore it apart before it could get close. She could feel the tension building. They were minutes from history. On the planet below, the Emperor appeared on every broadcast channel. Clad in his ceremonial armor, he stood in his throne room, surrounded by guards. His voice carried across. The system, you cannot touch us. Zereth Prime will stand for 10,000 more years. Humanity will kneel, as all before it have knelt. Laura listened without a flicker of emotion. When he finished, she opened a channel of her own, not to the Emperor, but to every ship in both fleets. Her voice was steady, each word sharp. As a blade, this is for my family. This is for the Kane colony. This is for every world you've burned. Watch closely. The Ragnarok lance powered up. Space itself seemed to hum, the graviton lens aligning with the planet. A beam of pure annihilation lanced out, punching through the planetary shields as if they were mist. It bored into the crust, straight to the planet's core. A heartbeat later, the world began to crack. Its oceans boiled away in clouds of steam, mountains split open, and fire poured from the wounds. The Emperor's broadcast cut to static as the palace, the city, and then the entire capital burned in blinding light. When it was over, Zereth Prime was nothing but a molten ruin, glowing like a second star in the system. Silence filled the com channels. No one in the galaxy had ever seen anything like it. Laura turned from the window, her expression unreadable. "It's done," she said quietly. But deep inside, she knew this was more than victory. Humanity's arsenal was now awake, and the galaxy had witnessed its fury. From this day forward, every empire, every warlord, every would-be conqueror would remember the fate of the Zereth and think twice before crossing Earth again.